Nothing sums up the parasitic relationship between players and gacha devs like HP inflation. Our caveman brains are constantly chasing that hit of dopamine after seeing big, beefy damage numbers. And due to the nature of gachas, that chase is constantly being exploited to promote new characters and weapons. Most of us have come to accept that this is just the reality of things, and some devs are very mindful when it comes to the escalation of enemy HP. The same can't be said for every developer though, with HP inflation in some games ramping up almost every single patch, ultimately killing the fun of their own games by outpacing the audience that plays them. I'm Forte, and let's talk about how HP inflation is the final boss of gacha gaming. So what is HP inflation? It's the unavoidable rise in enemy health points as the game progresses to keep the game challenging and hopefully engaging. The concept has a natural home in any game that's even remotely close to the RPG genre, and as someone who plays these games knows, there are two guarantees. Some tutorial NPC is going to need help killing rats, and by the end of the game you'll be throwing hands with God like Prime Mike Tyson. It's inevitable, and some kind of scaling is going to have to take place to bridge that gap. In RPGs and RPG adjacent games, this scaling of HP acts as a carrot on a stick to keep players pushing for more power, which in turn makes them seek out more difficult content. This works as an excellent driving factor for developers to work off of, since players will naturally be driven to achieve bigger numbers, and providing players with opportunities to display their dedication to the game makes everyone happy. However, what makes or breaks this feedback loop is the balance between the player and the developer and who gets to dial up the HP at any given point. On one end of the extreme, if the player has all the control all the time, the game will generally lack challenge throughout the experience, and without anything meaningful being thrown at the player, they will likely quit due to just not being engaged. On the other end, if the developer has decided that it's their way or nothing, it starts to really cheapen the reason for even playing the game altogether, since you start to feel like no matter what you do, the next boss is going to feel just as insurmountable as the last. And this can be particularly problematic in gachas, since players can easily become disillusioned and start viewing the experience as a countdown until their suffering starts all over again. After all, one of the worst feelings in gaming is locking in for a serious grind session only to have the finish line moved right before you reach it. In traditional single-player games, the control usually rests in the hands of the players, so the intensity of the grind for power is usually up to them to choose. In this case, players tackle the increasing HP as they see fit, moving on whenever they're most comfortable. Of course, the problem here becomes what's to stop players from over-leveling before leaving the beginning areas of the game. Well, unless you're an absolute madman and you decide to spend over 200 hours to hit the level cap before leaving Destiny Islands, this is usually where the hands of the developers are felt to nudge the players on once they've hit a soft cap, so to speak. And this can be done in a number of ways, like increasing the XP needed per level, having a power ceiling on a gear for a certain area, having progression mechanics unlocked later on in the game, etc. In my latest game of addiction, Granblue Fantasy Relink, the chase for bigger numbers is real, and the game gives you more than enough tools to play around with to reach them. But that also means that the HP of the bosses have to scale to match just how ridiculous those numbers can get. Each mission you embark on has a recommended power score for you to hit before you even start your attempt. Typically, you're able to climb well above that number by fully building out your characters using the resources that you currently have available, making the steep inflation of HP feel a lot less drastic. Though you are given the ability to grind to a comfortable spot before taking on these missions, there are a number of progression-related mechanics that create soft limits, one of the most notable being the weapon progression system. The game incentivizes you to fully max out each weapon since permanent stats and passes are hidden behind them, and to unlock the next big step in the weapon progression process, you need to max out certain weapons before you can fully power up what is essentially a character's ultimate weapon. There are several more mechanics that build your power level in Relink, and I love how it's handled in this game because you're given a lot of freedom in your approach to grinding without the developers interfering too much, leading to a game that does have an absurd level of HP inflation, but rarely does it ever feel like a slog to play through. And before moving on, it'd be wrong for me not to mention what I consider to be the modern godfather of big dumb numbers and overly inflated HP bars. No other series quite captures the escalation of numbers like the Disgaea series. Seriously, the first stages in these games will have you dealing humble 10s and 20s with an HP pool of like 100. Nothing crazy, real chill. Well, let's play Guess That Damage! Our contestant is Killia from the Cryo Blood Netherworld, and he wants a particular opponent DED dead. So he unleashes his ultimate move, Avidia Holy Water. A real killer move if I've ever seen one. Now viewer, how much damage do you think it did? 1,000? 20,000? 300 million? Come on now, don't be shy. Take a guess. Wrong! He did all the damage. Straight up deleted the other guy. Even without the context of anything else, this is a hilarious amount of damage for any character to do. But here's the health and stats for that boss. So yeah, while the Disgaea series does take it to the extremes, it's still a perfect example of a game series that gives the players the tools and resources to grind out to their heart's content, while periodically walling off the players with super bosses and challenges. And speaking of resources, taking the time to hit that like and subscribe button goes a long way. It genuinely helps out a lot. Anyways, back to the problem. Unfortunately, the balancing act that traditional single player games tend to benefit from doesn't exactly work the same way in gacha games. Gachas are free, live service, and need a reason for people to spend money. So due to their very nature, the control of HP is almost entirely left up to the developers, and players are literally on a timer until the HP inflation hits, patch after patch. It's hard to escape the frustration in this model since gachas need a hard limit to cap just how strong characters can be to push people into pulling for new characters, and raising enemy HP is probably the best way to apply pressure. Or at the very least, it's definitely the easiest. Luckily, this is where more generous and thoughtful developers shine. It's all too easy for greedy devs to push their audience into pulling on every single banner, but developers that smooth out those bumps that's caused by HP inflation stand out amongst the crowd, and this can be done in several ways as well. For example, in Zenless Zone Zero, from 1.0 to 1.4, the HP inflation was kept to a minimum, with the biggest gatekeeper being team composition and just how well your characters were geared. This is fairly normal for new gachas, where even the launch characters are enough to comfortably clear all the content. However, what players didn't know at the time was how pivotal that 1.4 patch would be going forward. With 1.4 came the release of the first Void Hunter agent, Miyabi Hoshimi. For anyone not in the know, Void Hunters in ZZZ are extremely powerful in the lore of the world, and Hoyo decided they should reflect that in their gameplay. In a vacuum, this makes sense, but it does introduce a few questions, including how do you keep the game interesting when one class of agents is able to roll through everything that other agents were challenged by? More often than not, the answer is increase the HP. And that's what Hoyo did for ZZZ. For patches after Miyabi's debut, bosses were made stronger to account for her existence in the game. This essentially screwed over anyone that joined after her release and set a bad precedent going forward. This is where I initially bowed out of playing the game myself, despite pulling Miyabi. On top of the game trying to be anti-Miyabi, the HP inflation was so blatant that it immediately became obvious that older teams had just been pushed back a whole tier. Nowadays, the HP inflation in ZZZ has been rounded out a bit, and the game has found a nice spot for players that are free to play and ones that have spent some money. The endgame modes in ZZZ require a decent bit of character knowledge and understanding of the boss mechanics, which works in the game's favor since it enables older characters to still have some uses on certain teams. Through smart pooling and a touch of tryharding, free-to-play players are still able to comfortably 3-star clear stages. Though of course this isn't always the case for every game because, as I said, it is easy for devs to let their greed ride and strong arm the players into pulling on banners. I absolutely love Honkai Star Rail when it first launched, and I played the game up until around when Dr. Ratio was given out, so I put in a consistent 8 months or so before moving on. I came back later around the release of Maide, since he looked like a really cool character and I wanted to try to pull him. So I hopped on and started trying to grind out some pulls to prepare for him. But unfortunately, I bounced off of the game almost immediately because none of my teams felt nearly as good as from when I remember playing them. To be fair, my team was fairly old at that point, but I did stop playing again. From the release of Memory of Chaos in 1.3 to around 1.5 when I quit, the total HP for the 12th floor of Memory of Chaos was about 1.7 times higher. With that only being a 2-patch difference, it's not great, but it's still not the worst, and if Star Rail had continued on that trend, it would be so much less controversial. However, Star Rail decided to shoot for the stars. The total HP for floor 12 of Memory of Chaos during version 1.5 was about 2.4 million. As of the 4.4 patch, it's around 41 million. That's over 10 times as much HP. For comparison's sake, if ZZZ continued on their current trend of HP inflation, on average, the oldest bosses would have about 3 times more HP than they did on their initial release. All things considered, a 300% increase over the course of 3 years, not terrible. But Star Rail's 1000% increase in 3 years is unforgivable. This level of HP inflation places an immense pressure on the player to keep up with the meta and pull on pretty much every banner, which ruins the fun for free-to-play players and whales alike. Because even for people who are willing to spend, they want to feel like they're getting some kind of value out of their pulls, and it's so much harder to justify when your brand new character starts to fall off after like 2 or 3 patches. Despite gachas not having the luxury of being as hands-off as traditional games, it's still possible to circumvent the use of HP inflation as a force to push sales. though this does require a bit more of a conscious effort from developers and will heavily depend on the type of game that they're making. A more action-oriented game like WoA that's centered around flashy combat and big numbers will inevitably have to be forced to go flashier, and the numbers will have to get bigger as the game goes on, which in turn makes the devs dial up the HP to compensate. However, a gacha game that places more emphasis on strategy and character kits will be able to delay the need for artificially increasing the difficulty through inflating HP. A great example of a gacha that has managed to sidestep the HP inflation issue is the OG Arknights. As a tower defense gacha, it automatically is in a lane of its own when compared to the plethora of Genshin-like gacha games, and it's able to lean into its strengths that comes with that particular kind of gameplay. So here, positioning is the name of the game, and smart team comps with good unit placement will pretty much just carry you. Although I haven't played the game in years at this point, as a launch player it was a pleasant surprise for me to be able to come back about 3 years or so later and find that my super old characters were not only useful, but still meta in some cases. Of course, this doesn't mean that Arknights is free from all the pressure from the devs, since they still have to implement some reason for people to pull. While the enemy HP is kept manageable, the game does suffer more from power creep, which is when the characters themselves get stronger and stronger as time goes on. This is another concept that's just expected in gacha games at this point, but Arknights does handle it fairly well. Because of the way that roles and character kits work in Arknights, older characters are still mostly able to perform as needed, eliminating the need to pull on every banner. This is when character knowledge and understanding of unit placement plays a bigger role, but it's still possible. What hurts most about a game like Star Rail that openly uses HP inflation as a lever for monetization is that games like the OG Arknights exist to prove that it's not necessary. Both games need you to feel the need to pull, but one of them found a clever and engaging way to incentivize its audience, and the other took the easy way out and just cranked the HP dial up to 11. So as gacha players, you and I, it's important for us to remember that HP inflation is a choice that's made every single patch. So whether it's your hard-earned money or your precious time, spend wisely. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you thought the video was cool, or dislike it and let me know in the comments how I need to get good. Or maybe you have a gacha to recommend that doesn't solely rely on HP inflation. Don't be a gatekeeper. But that's all I got. Until next time, this has been Forte, and I'm out.